Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 19 of the Mind Blown Zone. This one is part two of the meaning of consciousness, which was episode 17. We highly recommend that you start with episode 17, the meaning of consciousness, part one, because this is a direct continuation. Okay. So that'll serve as context for this one. How you doing, Brad?
I have never been better. How about yourself?
Fantastic today. It's just so impressive, Brad. You're better every single day.
It's unreal how that works.
I mean, why would you want it any other way? Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So we got three main things that we're going to be talking about in this one. We're going to be talking about consciousness outside of the materialist paradigm. We are going to be talking about the map of consciousness put forward by David Hawkins. And within that, we'll mention strategies to, ascend through the map. And we're also going to be talking about the difference between consciousness and conscience. There's just a interesting bit that came up in our discussions in preparation for this. I've got some interesting things going on down the bottom with body consciousness as well, and Brad's got some very interesting remarks to make at the end. Anything you want to mention before we dive in, Brad?
He hopes. No, let's go ahead and take off. I think we left off with we were talking about what maybe classified as paranormal activities or abilities. I think we were talking about specifically about NDEs, which are near death experiences, or OOBs, which are out of body experiences. And I had kind of framed that as something that yogis and certain Tibetan and Buddhist yogis and gurus and so forth were capable of actually having these out of body experiences. But some people may be a little bit more familiar with those as things that happen spontaneously to certain people. And I've certainly talked to a number of people who claim they've had them. So I wanted to make sure that was, compared with this idea of astral travel. So this is another idea similar to an NDE or an OOB. The difference being that it's something that's done consciously and deliberately. So people practice and train to do this type of thing, and they go off into other dimensions. So you could very much compare it to a drug trip. There's certainly a lot of warnings about doing these types of things. As the story goes, you manifest your thoughts and feelings instantaneously when you go off into these other dimensions. So the cautionary tale is if you're easily frightened or scared, you can. It's been said that some people have become scared to death literally in their astral travel, and they don't make it back. Their fright was so great that it just literally killed them. If you can believe that. What do you think of that, Matt?
Yeah, I believe it. Having had psychedelic experiences multiple times and been absolutely terrified and zooming through the universe, I can attest to that being a severe possibility.
Right. So there seems to be a lot of truth to it. I've heard it from many different corners and walks of life in that space. So again, these are all things that aren't really explained at all from the materialist point of view. Another item is remote viewing. Have you heard of remote viewing before? I'm not sure
Don't
we've
think
talked
so.
about it. So this is an interesting little tale. This goes back to was it Plutarch? There's two or three guys that started doing this in the Bay Area in late '60s, early '70s, and somehow or another, one was at Stanford, and of course they have tight CIA connections, and eventually the CIA got involved and funded these guys to do some of this, what they called remote viewing. And in effect, what these certain people with these abilities could do is they could see things sitting in in an office at a desk. They could see things halfway around the world or anywhere for that matter. So they got involved in crime solving and murder scenes and picking up little details. There was never like such great precision, but what they could do is they could draw what they saw. And so I think the military picked out some things for them, and they wanted to test them, and these were things that were like super top secret military, and It would say, all right, here are the coordinates, 180-degree latitude, 62, whatever, longitude. And these guys would just sit down and just empty their minds. This is the gift that they had, right? Is they could just empty their minds and direct their consciousness towards whatever the target was. And then they would draw things. And, these drawings would, I've seen a few of them. They'd turn out to look, very accurate to whatever the target destination was. So this is the idea, is that their consciousness, right, was traveling off into this other time space continuum, and they were able to see these things that they didn't have any knowledge of, couldn't have possibly known about, and they captured it and would draw it or describe it, and with a high degree of accuracy. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I'll mention something toward the end of that when you're finished mentioning everything you want to mention on the topic.
That's the idea. I've seen a few people try it in modern times, some with better success than other, but it's almost like you have to. The people that seem to be successful with it aren't trying. They don't try to think of something, right? Or they don't try to, what could they be talking about? And they just kind of go. You have to flow with it. So that's the trick, and that's why everybody's not good at it, of course. But it's still, allegedly it's still being done today, and it's top secret or whatever. And a lot of people do it, for fun or as a hobby. Out on the internet, you can find, I'm sure lots of YouTube channels that where people do this kind of thing and, record their successes and failures. So that's the idea.
Right.
How could you possibly do that if you're really this clump of matter of chemicals and, sitting in this spot? It's not possible that, you could see something in Russia or wherever. Some other in the Congo. So there's no good explanation other than this idea that there's something else going on beyond the material and chemical. So that's the idea. Go ahead with your thought.
Are you familiar with Beetlejuice, the guy, the sharp black guy?
Oh, yeah, the Howard Stern guy. I thought I'd say Michael
Yeah.
Keaton.
Of
course.
I was thinking you would definitely know him from being on Howard Stern.
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah.
So like he's like, oh yeah, I did this thing. Like just the other day I was watching. He was like, oh yeah, there was a school shooter. Yeah, I was there. Oh, it was crazy. I jumped out the back window, got away from him. And then the guy's like, so what happened? Did you get the shooter? He's like, oh yeah. I snuck back in. I snuck up behind him and I put the handcuffs on him. And he's like in full belief that he did that, right? And the first perception would be that, oh, he's like crazy. He's like just pathological liar, just has these crazy fascinations and believes them. But sometimes I wonder if he's like conscious, is like connected to like the cosmic consciousness or something, and he's like seeing things that other people have done, and he's just not really separated from it. And he's like, I did it, but he's like not talking about I as in himself, but like just the version of I that he's experiencing. Like someone did it and he's aware of it, and he's like, yeah, I did it, and just
Right.
it feels completely true to him. Do you reckon that's a little bit related to this remote viewing?
In a way, yeah. I mean, it could be, and I don't know the context of the story or anything, but certainly at much higher levels, that's what that could be easily explained in the way you were suggesting. The question is Beetlejuice at that level, or is he hallucinating?
Yeah, I think that's everybody's question.
Tend to bet on the latter, unless there really was a guy who found the shooter and put him in handcuffs and snuck in the back door and did all those things. If that story is true, in other words, if somebody actually did all those things, he just substituted me for the actions of another body,
right?
Then that would make sense. But if no one had found the shooter yet, and nobody snuck in the window and put him in handcuffs, then it's hallucinatory, right?
Right. And even if it's someone, it might not even be the same event and the same people. Like someone somewhere might have snuck out the window, and someone somewhere else might have snuck up behind a shooter and put them in handcuffs. And
I
he's just like
suppose,
tapped
yeah.
into that all at once and like, oh yeah, yeah, that's what I did. Yeah, it happened.
Yeah, I don't know,
I don't
but
know,
yeah.
but it seems strange, you know. Like the
Yeah,
materialist explanation is he's crazy, but
sure.
you can't be sure of that, right?
Uh, it's not hard to be sure of things unless you get, a little bit more context and a little bit more detail on that. But it's a similar idea, for sure, to this type of thing. And you could, it would be, if he was really doing astral travel, whether consciously or accidentally out of body, right? He wouldn't see it as himself, right? He would be looking down upon it. That's the stories you get from the near death experiences and the out of body people and so forth. Astral travel is they're seeing things from a distance, including what they think of as themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Right. Yep. Yep. Yep.
So substituting your identity for somebody else that's a much higher level experience typically. With there's the barrier between me and you vanishes. So I don't know. He could
Mm-hmm.
be there, right? And he's been that way for a long time, but everybody thinks he's crazy, so he gets treated the way he gets treated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, people who reach these levels of consciousness spontaneously or accidentally in the past, many of them ended up in insane asylums,
Right. Right. Right.
mental wards,
Against their will,
because
I'm sure.
100% against their will, but they're basically telling everybody else you're crazy. It's not like that. It's like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would go on to describe an experience that isn't similar to the standard consciousness out there. And of course, the reaction is to lock that person up. So, a lot of people that reached a certain level of awareness in the past just never talked about it.
Right.
Right? That was the safest thing to do. Keep your mouth shut. Go along to get along. Anyway, so that was another idea. Lucid dreaming was the last one that I threw up there. Just that some people have heard of that, and this is this idea that you can shift your consciousness, let's say, into this witnessing position, and you can see that you're actually dreaming. So the you that you think you are, right, is this actual dream character, and you can see it, and you can then manipulate the dream from a different vantage point. Just interesting
Mm-hmm.
in and of itself. It's really not an idea that you can't apply any science to it or measure it or anything like that. But it's a skill like astral travel or remote viewing. So that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So just some ideas that these are outside the scientific paradigm, and therefore they're not talked about or dealt with. They're just ignored for the most part because you can't fit them in any scientific chemical box, right?
Mm-hmm.
They tend to lend themselves to a spiritual explanation, obviously.
Right. And
So
yeah, there seems
that
to
was
be
it for
some
that
sort of
section.
demand. Seems to be some sort of demand from the materialist types for a scientific explanation.
Yeah,
Well, if you can't
and
prove it
so
scientifically, I won't even consider it.
right, it's just they just move on. Right, there's no reason to ever think about it or talk about it again. It doesn't make any sense. Can't measure it,
Mm-hmm.
so don't bring it up. And if you do bring it up, I'm
Mm-hmm.
just going to shout you down for being a spiritual nonsense woo-woo purveyor. Put you down.
Okay.
If I can't shut you up, I'm going to put you down. That kind of a tactic.
Mm-hmm.
But all these things are very, very legitimate. I've seen and heard enough of them over the years to know that you can't hand wave them away if you're being intellectually honest with the way
Right.
things are and happen. So there we have it. What's next?
Well, we got this map of consciousness, something we've looked at quite a lot. David R. Hawkins, you introduced that to me. Why don't you introduce it to everybody else?
So yeah, Hawkins, interesting guy. He was by training career, he was a psychiatrist, and he stumbled into these ideas through a couple different things that he was working with and studying back in the 60s and 70s. With kinesiology and some other practices that he was involved in, and eventually came up with a methodology to derive a map of consciousness. And the basic idea of the map of consciousness is that it operates in different frequencies. And so you can recognize, if you know what you're looking for, you can recognize what frequency people are operating at based on their behaviors, emotions, actions, and so forth. So he developed this idea with this kinesiology that it was like muscle strength. And the truer something was, the stronger someone could hold their arm. He would basically would have his the people he worked with like hold their arms out to the side, right, like away from their body, and he would push down on their arm. And he developed this relationship with these people. And the more true something was, the stronger they were able to hold their arms, and the more it was untrue, the more their arms would get pushed down, like unconsciously. They could not resist the him pushing down on their arm. That makes sense?
Yeah, I think one caveat though is the this thing seems to work for anyone. So for something like this, mapping consciousness, you want to make sure you're using very objective people, right? Because I've seen people do this thing with people who are like talking complete nonsense, but when they believe it's true, they're stronger,
Right.
even though it's
That's a
complete nonsense, right? So
well.
I
That
understand
yeah,
that he chose people who are quite honest and objective for this, right?
yeah. He went literally did tens and if not hundreds of thousands of tests with with a handful of people in his circles that were studying this with him.
Mm-hmm.
So he wouldn't like call somebody up from the audience and say, how do we measure Einstein, right? And he wouldn't take that value that they got
Right.
from the random person out of the audience. So there's certainly, I mean, anybody can make the claim that it's not objective and that it has bias, and it probably does have a little bit of bias in it. Who can
Mm-hmm.
say? I think the one example I gave that I think lends some credence to that idea is that where he would map Einstein up at the I think at the four right at the 500 barrier, right, as being one of the great brilliant scientific minds of the 20th century and so forth, and because that's what 99,000 out of 100, 9999999 out of 10,000 believe just that, right? So beliefs definitely do come into play.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Oh yeah.
um, he also gives a high score to Freud, who I also have zero respect for. And I don't think he was a great mind. I mean, he certainly, did some interesting things, but overall, right, he led us down a darker path than we were before his stuff showed up. So he probably had a soft spot because he probably, of course, learned all about Freud and as a psychiatrist, and that
Mm-hmm.
made him lean in that direction. But when you look at the scale itself, whether or not Freud shows up as a 499 or 199, the point is that I think the emotions that he tied to the scale they seem very accurate and relevant when you actually think it through. So we'll take a look at that here in a sec.
Okay.
What else do we got here? So yeah, his scale is on a scale of 1 to 1,000. That was it could have been on 1 to 1,000,000 or 1 to 10 or anything and everything in between. But this gave him enough room to put things, slide in the major emotional / behavioral characteristics to apply that value to things. And so that was the scale that that he put together, right? So it's arbitrary in that sense, just like all models and scales are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom of the scale, right, we have the least desirable, shall we say, attributes. And at the top of the scale, we have the most desirable. That doesn't mean that one level of consciousness is better than another level. I mean, people tend to treat it that way, react to it that way, but they're all still levels of consciousness. So at each level, you're effectively having a different experience depending on what level you're at. You're seeing, interacting with in the world in a different way based on the level of consciousness that you hold.
Mm-hmm.
That ring true?
Sure.
So we could
Shall we at
say
least identify them and just name them all, just really run through just to have it clear in people's mind before we go into more explanation?
yeah, I wanted to get the areas in between there and here. So I just real quickly, right, just to say that down at the low level, you could put like a serial murderer or, somebody who's just absolute bereft and depressed and deep, grief or whatever. We tend to put them at the low end of the scale. And at the high end of the scale, at the very high end of the scale, we've got your spiritual avatars like Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Lao Tzu, etc. So that would be your scale. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And where does he put most of us? Well, when he first, and this will be interesting as we go through the scale, but I just wanted to mention when he first started to put this together and get it out there, I'm going to say it was the early 90s. He had the average of humanity at below this critical number of 200. And in the course of the 2000s, from 2000 to 2010, right, he said humanity had actually tipped the scale, and we were now, as a collective, above this critical 200 level, which we'll talk about here in a second. So that was it. That's this idea that humanity's consciousness is rising. So the collective is rising on the scale. We were at this lower level, and we're now reaching into these higher levels. So, and that you can point that back a little bit to my talk, I think at the end of the third legal overlay discussion podcast we did. I said, I'm going to throw a little zinger here in the end for you, and that we needed this legal system to keep humanity in check because we were in such a degraded state of consciousness for so long that this needed to be implemented in effect. But I also added, a lot of people are breaking way, way up out of this low beneath 200 level, and they're starting to see, the fraud and deception in the legal system. And there's just a lot of information, a lot of people talking about this now in certain circles, and they're seeing through the deception, and they're going to be able to step on out of it. Unfortunately, a lot of them think we need to just tear it all down and get rid of it, but it still needs to be in place to maintain and manage the people that are operating at these lower levels. Yeah.
Indeed.
So just want to throw that in there before we dive into the actual numbers. You want to take a few here? You want to go after a few?
Sure. Well, let's establish a few here, like lowest operating levels of consciousness, right? Shame, 20 out of 1,000. Guilt, 30 out of 1,000. Apathy, 50. Grief, 75. Fear, 100. Right. So these are the absolute lowest ones.
Right.
Shall we read off the definitions just so they're clear?
I don't think so, actually. I think everybody understands what all these
pretty familiar,
words
right?
mean. Yeah, it's just the idea that someone who's you could just say if you've ever seen someone who's deeply, deeply ashamed or feels deeply, deeply guilty of something, right? They're really unreachable, right? I think that's the key idea here, is that you can't help them out of their present state of consciousness. Right? Say, you got to get over it, Sammy. Right? Just shake it off, and tomorrow's a brand new day. That doesn't work, right? And the reason that doesn't work is because they're in such a low vibrational state or frequency or energetic, emotional state. So it takes a little bit more to rattle them out of there, right? You can think of people that are really, really depressed, for example, right? You put them down into these categories, right? Grief, apathy, guilt, shame. And, if you've ever known anybody who's slipped into depression before, there's nothing you can really do for them, right? You want to help them, but there's just nothing you can say that can help them out of that, kind of pit of despair that they're in at the moment. Pit of despair.
It doesn't matter how many positive ways of looking at things and how many motivational principles you provide. Doesn't have anything to do with what they're experiencing, right?
Right. A lot of that, you can think of this in a very simple metaphor would be like oil and water. They don't mix, right? So you would think, well, I'll just bring my friend over who's always happy and jovial and excited and just super high energy, and
Cheer them up.
we'll just take them out to the day out, to the park or whatever. And we'll cheer them up, and they don't mix. Right? They're almost it's an annoyance that person is around the person who's vibrating at these lower levels, right? They just don't have anything in common in that period. And this is true for anything, like some relationships that go bad. For example, if one person, let's just say they're both generally in the same levels of consciousness, when they meet, and then 3 or 4 years later something happens and one of them either goes way up or way down, they're no longer compatible. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes evident because they'll, it's like, I can't stand to be around this person anymore, and every little thing they do irritates me. And this is what's happened: is one's either gone up a lot or one's gone down a lot, and they have nothing in common anymore. They're really not viewing the world anywhere near the same ballpark as they were. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think the other thing that is irrelevant to someone when they're experiencing these frequencies is this map. Look at the map. See, you're here. That's why you're feeling this way. See, what you have to do is go up to this level on the on the consciousness map, and you'll feel better. It'd be the least relevant thing ever, right?
I don't know. I mean, it would be, at least it would be interesting to show, to show them. It could
be interesting, yeah.
Right. It's it's better than just these arbitrary things like, dude, just get over it, get better, right? That isn't going to work. We say, look, here's where you're at. So you're experiencing a miserable world right now, and here's some numbers that show it. You need to get up and out of there, and we'll explain why the 200 level is so important here in a second. And maybe it'll ring true to a lot of people. It's just something that they have seen in their own lives. It's almost impossible to have not seen it these past 3 years. But it's really interesting. So hopefully, it lends itself to, people being a bit more empathetic or compassionate or sympathetic to, friends, family members, coworkers, etc., that are just in a tough spot right now, right? For whatever reason. They are not the same, not themselves, etc. This is the good reason. And obviously, you mentioned fear, which is really the main linchpin of all of these lower level emotions. They all stem from some form of fear, which is a slow vibrating energy, the opposite of love. Okay. Any other thoughts on those lower level ones?
That's okay. So shall we categorize these next ones? Desire, anger, pride. Kind of
yeah.
ringing a bit similar.
But yeah. So those are
desire 125, anger 150, pride 175. Can you comment on this?
Right. I'm just going to say those are, you can kind of, let's put those into the 7 deadly sins category, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Pride is obviously the deadliest of sins, right? And that's kind of where we're at there with desire, envy, jealousy. Apathy is the sloth one, but you're kind of looking at the 7 deadly sins. You can kind of see how those map to this Hawkins scale pretty nicely.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, eight here, but yeah,
right.
Yeah, there's
it's not a perfect
overlay there.
Not a perfect map, but it's pretty similar, right? And so these we're being told not only from ancient texts, the wisdom in those, to modern day, semi-scientific outlook here, or very scientific, depending on how you look at it. We're seeing that map, but pride is that last level where obviously we can turn on our TVs and see that in full force in TV shows and movies. A lot of that's going on right at the cusp of this 200 level, and this is a critical level for one singular reason: to get up to this 200 level. And Hawkins labeled this courage, and that's important. That's the value there. But what's the problem with being below 200, Matt?
You're unhappy. You're unalive. You're suffering.
Even more important than that.
Well, tell me.
Remember? the people that were anybody below the 200 level, so all the emotions we've described, that they're vibrating primarily in there, they're unable to distinguish truth from falsehood.
Oh yeah.
Isn't that fascinating? They're
Yes.
very easily deceived and fooled, and that
Right.
is, certainly during the COVID events, that for me it was hard to believe some of the things that I experienced and witnessed. In
Right.
the face of all of it. And we won't get into any detail there, but it was very surprising that certain people just think this is so obviously a lie. Why can't you see it? And I would be speaking to perfectly intelligent people and they didn't see it, could not see it. So it was, this is when I stumbled into Hawkins. It was very early on, a couple months into the COVID thing. And I was relieved to get that explanation. I said, this makes sense. This makes sense. So it's a real interesting idea that he came up with there. So that was what really, really attracted me to his work at that point. So anyway, we get to the 200
it's
level.
kind of like,
go ahead.
It's kind of as if as if true reality or something is vibrating. This is just a metaphor, it's just as if true reality is vibrating at level 200, right? And if you're vibrating lower than that, and then true reality just like is out of it's out of your reality. You're not related to it at all, and you
Well, I don't.
just
Yeah,
don't connect with it. The truth just doesn't penetrate you.
I'd say true reality is, for at least in this realm, is 1,000. Right, this would be the one objective reality that I often talk about. Right,
Right.
like
That's
we all
pretty well said.
all of us that can agree, right? If we're above 200, right? If you're below 200, this isn't going to make much sense. But most of us can agree that if there is there is one objective reality out there, right? There has to be. Right?
Right.
But then the next question is: are you seeing that one objective reality, or are you seeing Matt's version of reality? Right? And if we're all being honest, I'm seeing Brad's version of reality. I'm not seeing the one objective reality.
Right. So I guess the
So
Christian philosophy is that only Jesus, was seeing the true reality, right?
well, I mean, I don't think it has to be a Christian point of view. I mean, we can look at the words that were said and see that we're not seeing things, and that's in the same way that Jesus or Buddha or Krishna or Lao Tzu was, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at what the four of them were saying and many, many others, you'll see that that you can harmonize what they're all saying, even though it doesn't match up with your subjective reality. You can get a sense that they're seeing things differently in a way that they all share across religions and spiritual traditions and philosophies and so forth.
Right. Yeah. Like
Right.
even if you can't match your whole life up to it, like at least when you're seeing it or hearing what they say and contemplating it and wondering about it, you get a sense that that kind of feels right. That feels like a direction that I want to move in.
Right. It sounds good, but you
Mm.
immediately know that it doesn't match up with where think the way you see things. Like, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
see things the way I see them, but I hate so and so, and we got to get rid of
Mm-hmm.
so and so, right? You know what I mean? If only we could get rid of all these bad guys, then I would see everything like Jesus saw it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's kind
Right.
of right, kind of where most of us are at. So, anyway,
So
it's an
that's like anger
interesting,
and pride, right?
yeah, big time pride. I think most people. I think Hawkins said, at least in the 80s and the 90s, that I think the average was somewhere in the 180 to 190 range. So that's basically pride.
Right.
So
And I think,
everybody,
take your power back kind of introductory video. Like we talk to people who are in this anger and pride level, right? And
right,
desire. Like people like we're people who are in shame, guilt, apathy, grief, and fear, very, very hard to reach. Very, very hard to reach. It's just very self-oriented, poor me, everything sucks, right? Desire,
right,
anger, and pride, this is a level where you're kind of like having hope. Like hope has kind of emerged and you see possibility for better things. You're kind of like, you want better things. You're angry that they're not that way. You have pride that you are a certain way, and maybe some things that you know about are good, right? And you're getting a sense that there's something much better that can exist, and that's kind of the level that we try to reach people at for Take Your Power Back.
Yeah, they're only reachable people in a sense, right?
Right.
And just to be clear, jumping from level 20 to level 200 isn't a one-step process, right? You're not in a deep state of feeling ashamed, and then tomorrow you have courage, right? Usually you have to
Right.
work your way up the scale,
Mm-hmm.
with some time and experience, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's right. So yeah, so we get the courage, and that really is really that's the sense that I can make some changes, some positive changes. And
Mm-hmm.
I realize I'm in error in certain ways. And you start to, a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
self-awareness starts to kick in at the 200 level, while there's very little below it. And obviously you start to have the ability to discern truth versus falsehood, which is very critical, because as we know, the truth will set you free. So we want to be able to find it, obviously. So interesting number there. So what's next here?
Neutrality.
What's that? Yeah, 250 at neutrality. So yeah,
I'll
this
just
is where you've go ahead.
I'll just read the definition, right? Just as how it's been put. The state of neutrality reflects an attitude of openness and flexibility. It is a state of acceptance where individuals are content and unattached to outcomes. Can you
All
add
right, so
more?
that's a big step, right? It's a big
Mm-hmm.
step from courage to neutrality.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that phrase unattached to outcomes. This is a very big Buddhist teaching, right? No attachments. Have no attachments. And for most of us, right, it's very common that we are highly attached to outcomes, right? So that's a big step to go from that courage to neutrality. Take some time, typically, to make that jump. Like, I don't care what happens. I'm just happy to be here right now. Right? Not many people would say that. So you can, I'm just saying, if you just took the average person off the street, and if Hawkins' scale is right, and everybody, let's say the average consciousness, he died in 2012, so 11 years ago. Let's say everybody's at 220 or 230 or even 240 now. They haven't quite reached neutrality yet. You can see how most people you tend to know are probably are attached to outcomes, and they're overjoyed when the outcome works out the way they want it to, and they're slightly sad or depressed when it doesn't. Yeah.
And certainly not open to new ideas and not flexible to changing circumstances that go against the straight line path that they were seeing toward their desires.
Right. A little bit of herd mentality mixed in there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a neat jump in the scale. What's next?
Willingness. 310. At this level, individuals are motivated to pursue growth and improvement. There is a sense of optimism, enthusiasm, and a readiness to take on new challenges.
That's where we're certainly aiming people with the Take Your Power Back course. Right? We're trying to get them up through this pride, anger, desire level into courage, neutrality, and hoping at the end of the course that they can step into this state of willingness, this 310 level. That's certainly the goal of the course, because feeling optimistic and enthusiastic tends to lead to the outcomes that we want. Not that we're attached to them at that level, right? But we're certainly quietly happy when our outcomes are going our way, right?
Right.
So it's a neat level. Anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, the willingness level is where you see people, involved in the self-development niche. They're like, yeah, I really can do this. Yeah, if
That's right.
I get up, have a healthy breakfast, and get stuff done,
The can-do attitude.
can do attitude. Yeah. You believe in yourself attitude, right?
That's right. It has tremendous power, right? Because the more you have that attitude, the more likely you are to actually pull off what you believe. That's
Mm-hmm.
how important it is to be seen that way. Cool. What do we got next?
Acceptance. This level signifies a state of profound acceptance of oneself and the world. It includes understanding and practicing forgiveness and developing a harmonious perspective on life.
350. Yeah, that's a big step for a lot of people.
Yes. I would say that, all the ones like willingness, neutrality, courage, like for me, it feels like those are like mastered, fully integrated. But the acceptance one is the lowest one that I would identify as like, I have not fully integrated this one. This
Right.
is still, shaky and gives me, suffering.
Yeah. Well, it's, yeah. I mean, like it's society, right? The society that we are totally immersed in out there is trying to do everything to keep us out of this level. Right? We don't
Mm-hmm.
have to look any further than politics and certain efforts to push agendas in our faces that divide us. And the last thing they want us doing is, practicing understanding and forgiveness of one another. They want us at each other's throats.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see the operation of the establishment out there trying to hold people back from this one. And yeah, this one, I can't say that I'm aware of too many people that are in this space. Certainly,
Would you say
I
the
knew some.
behavior that corresponds to acceptance is the lack of acceptance would be arguing?
Say that again.
Would you say a behavior that corresponds to a lack of acceptance would be arguing?
Argue. No, not really. I mean,
Okay.
like arguing in a nasty way or just
Yeah.
arguing in general.
You're no, that's not good. That's not good. This is right.
Yeah.
This is what's right and good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you certainly aren't at this level at all, right? If you're in that space,
Right.
right? In other words, you're not understanding of the position that that person is coming from.
Right.
Whether you think they're right or wrong, obviously you think they're wrong, but if you're treating them like, because they're wrong, they're an idiot, and you know what I mean, that kind of attitude, then
Okay.
you're not
Right.
you don't have it yet. You have to think, all right, where's this guy on the scale? I'll bet he's 175 or 220 or whatever, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So if you suddenly bring that to mind, then you have a little bit more. I think the word really understanding and compassionate towards somebody, because you don't know what their life's like, you don't know what they've been through, so it's hard to come to say you've got to come to this conclusion that I've come to based on my life path.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you're probably right in the argument that you're in, it's seeing the spot that they're in and saying, well, yeah, I can see why you can't hear this or you don't understand this, and that's okay. We can walk away as friends. But a healthy argument between like you and me, for example, I don't see any problem with that.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right? We don't end the argument by saying, well, you're an idiot and I don't ever want to talk to you again because you don't agree with me. Right?
One of the first things that Brad said to me was, "Just want to let you know, you can't offend me. Can't
Yeah.
can't get offended." And I
Yeah.
swear to God, he's never been offended ever. Like, it's hilarious.
And in fairness to that, it just happened, by the way. I didn't decide one day I wasn't going to be offended. I just started to notice that people would do or say something around me or about me, and I wasn't offended. I'm like, all right, not offended.
Right.
Weird.
So I
Can't
still
say
get
how it
offended.
happened.
Where'd you put this getting offended? Is that in
I,
pride or something or anger?
yeah, it's probably in the pride spot. And we should probably
Mm-hmm.
make it clear that this is the dominant vibration, right? You could be outside of pride for 98% of all parts of your,
Right.
life, but maybe you're prideful about, this little aspect. So there's a little bit clinging on. That doesn't mean you're still trapped below 200. You've
Yeah.
just got this little piece of pride to shake off. It's pulling you down a little bit.
Yeah. Like, no matter, there's no like constant place where you are. There's like a spectrum, and where there's like where you mostly are, and it's just sometimes you go up really high, and sometimes you go down low. Right.
Right. Right. So interesting level there. What do we got next?
Reason.
Matt's favorite level. Yeah.
The reason level signifies a strong focus on learning and understanding and is characterized by logic, analysis, and a pursuit of knowledge.
Right.
The Ayn Rand level.
Right.
If
Exactly.
anyone wants to
Philosophers.
master reason, if you want to
Right.
master reason, you need to read Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology.
Mm.
It's the Bible of reason. Okay, read it
It's the
twice.
bomb. And get back to us. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So this is, and what's interesting about this level, I'll just say, is that most people that we're aware of that aren't, some type of spiritual guru or avatar, the highest they could reach on the Hawkins scale was 499.
Mm-hmm.
So they could not step into this 500 and above level
Right.
purely from the intellectual standpoint. So that's where I was talking earlier, Einstein and Freud, and some of these people that we've Plato, and some of these other people were all. It was interesting. He put Plotinus, I think, at 530, which was a Neoplatonic philosopher was really really quite spiritual and put forth some pretty powerful stuff. But it was interesting that he was one of the few that hurdled past that level, the 500 mark. But
Right.
yeah, the smartest people you can think of all fall into this 400 to 500 category.
Right. Like definitely, I would put Nietzsche. I've read quite a bit of Nietzsche, but this a lot of reason. Um, like oscillating between acceptance and reason, just in amongst there.
He was
But not
probably
much love, right? Not much of the next one.
right. Well, but he was basically at the chasm or the door between reason and love, and
Right.
that's what made him go mad. Right? Is he was
Right.
trying to intellectually figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's relatable.
Right. And it's that this next everything on the top half of the scale is not intellectually figurable outable, and
Right.
that's
Right.
the
Right.
real
Yeah.
frustrating thing to the intellectuals.
Yeah.
Right. Like, from the materialist standpoint that we've been comparing and contrasting with, it doesn't, you have to ignore it, you just have to throw it all out. I mean, not to say that they don't love people or have love or anything, but it doesn't fit into their worldview paradigm, so they can't grasp it, can't read about it in a
Right.
book and employ it.
Right.
But yeah, this is where you get into unconditional love, and it's right, big step, and very few people can hear what that really is or really means, because
Mm-hmm.
almost all human activity is based very much on conditional love, right? I'll love
Mm-hmm.
you under these conditions only, whatever those are.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
only
never
like,
noticed that this one said unconditional love. I, I did not notice that.
yeah, it's a necessity to be at that level, right? So perhaps the only people on the planet that really truly express unconditional love, you could say, would be mothers, are the closest, so that they can handle enormous slights and affronts from their children and still maintain their love, right? They're the best at it, without a doubt, and the ones that express it the best.
Mm-hmm.
Not to get all gender talking or anything like that, but that's where you'll see it, right? A mother whose son's a mass murderer and does horrible things to her and robs her and whatever, beats her, but she still loves him, right? She's like, I still love him.
Mm-hmm.
He's my boy, or whatever, right? So that is an example of unconditional love. So yeah,
Okay.
that's where you would be having that argument with that person, friendly argument, and you're expressing compassion and understanding, right, for their position. You're not tearing them up, calling them an idiot, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again,
Yeah.
we're
Like
now we're
if you moving if you can see I can see how the unconditional love would require pretty much full integration of acceptance.
right. Yeah, we're as soon as we step into this 500 and above, we're talking about things that are not common to the human experience.
You know, I reckon though that he has put reason above acceptance, and I think reason is lower than acceptance. I think reason is easy
Fair enough.
because I feel like uh I feel like I have mastery of reason, which is higher, but acceptance is tough for me.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe there's some people out there that think the reverse.
That's a good point.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Okay,
so what comes next here? We've
joy.
got joy 540, right? So
Right.
everybody knows what joy is, and it's maybe it's important to point out too that we all sometimes bleed into this above 500 level, like like puppy love kind of a situation where you're just giddy and can't think of anything but the one you love, and you know what I mean. You're just
Hmm.
you ever had that happen to yourself or happen to a friend, right? You're actually up in this level, acting irrationally as per the observations of the people around you, right? So you've actually stepped into this space beyond reason in your deep sense of love.
Hmm.
And that's this where this joy comes into, where there's joy for the key in understanding this joy levels. There's joy for no good reason. You're just joyful or blissful, however you want to think about that. Nothing has happened to you to make you joyful or blissful. That's just your normal state, if you will, like your contentment state that you're at day in and day out, right? Where you're just neutral and normal.
Right.
That's the up at this level, that state is this quiet state of joy. You're not, leaping around and dancing and that sort of thing, right? It's an internal state.
Hmm.
Important to point out, but it's always there. Like even when something what you would normally describe as bad happening to you, you're still that joy state is still there. It's very perplexing, right? Like why I should be angry right now. I should be pissed. I should be vengeful or retaliate or whatever, right? But you're not. You're like, nah, stuff happens. So
Hmm.
that's the joy level, just to be clear. Inner sense of contentment.
Just to add some things, just personal experiences. Yeah, I feel like there's like like it says here like a profound sense of serenity, like a full integration of joy would be like just all the time, right? And at a high level of joy. Like with me, I feel like there's like a little like there's some joy in constant background joy that I'm always like, ah, it's so good, it's so good. But for example, like when we start the podcast and I say, "How are you?" You're like, "Never better," and I believe you. And you're like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "Well, good," but I'm like, yeah, and a little pissed off too. Like,
Right. Yeah. It's like I said, it's how do I describe this? Um, it's recognizable when the things that used to upset you don't upset you anymore. That's how it's recognizable.
oh yeah.
It's not for people that ride the roller coaster, and there's a lot of them out there, right? They think of joy as this great thing. They're going out with their friends tonight. They're going to do this and they're going to do that. And they meet a perfect
Hmm.
guy or they do this and they get picked, they have this thing with their friend. You know what I mean? It's like this whole night was joy to them in comparison to, their 40-hour work week or whatever. Right. So, and then if something doesn't go their way, then they're down in the dumps. Right. They're feeling bad about things. So that's what most people, when they hear this word joy, they think of it. And perhaps the thing that marks it, which isn't, and we didn't write it down here, but the marker of this is, and I just lost it, is that the outer world no longer impacts your inner state. That's the key. Nothing out there can mess with your inner state. Follow?
Yep.
That's when you know you've hit this 540 level.
Right.
Doesn't matter what happens out there. I'm going to stay the same inside. And that
Right.
perhaps is even better, more representative of the next level, which is
Well, just as
peace.
one comment on this thing you said, is like, It's like you gradually reach this level, right? Like all these things that used to annoy you subside, frustration goes away, and then there's just a joyful contentment. And yet, I see a lot of videos on the internet that are like telling people, like, feel this way, as if it's
Mm.
something you can like do and like just shift your mindset and like, oh, I just feel joy now. But it's really not like that. It's like a whole life journey to let go of the things that let go of the resistance to joy, I suppose.
Yeah, it's really it really is. You said the right words there. It's a process of letting go. All of
Mm-hmm.
this is. It's not a process of accumulating things. It's actually a process of dumping things. Right. So
Okay.
you eventually you just dump the idea that, well, if I'm not a billionaire by the age of 40, then it's okay. Right. But from age 20 to 39, that's all you focused on was being a billionaire. And you were like, if I don't hit my billionaire status by 40, I'm going to be a failure, a wreck. I'm horrible. I'm not a success.
Yeah.
See?
When I was about 32 or something, someone who was 18 said that to me. They were like, if I wasn't really successful like 30, I would feel like I was a total failure. I'm
Right.
like, are
Right.
you
Right.
kidding me? Well, good luck with that.
Yeah. They got some learning to do. Right.
Yep. Shall we do peace?
Anyway, yeah, that's the peace level here. You could substitute the word bliss into there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, what do they say? Deep tranquility in the absence of internal conflict. The
A
exhibiting
broad
of
understanding of
broad.
life and exhibit compassion for all beings.
Right. So you're starting to, that's the Buddhist type thing starting to happen here. But
Mm-hmm.
obviously, if you've reached this level, you can't bear to see ant get stepped on, or see watch somebody smash a spider in their kitchen or whatever. Right. It hurts to see it, and that's when you're getting into this level of awareness or consciousness. Sorry, I shouldn't be. Why would I do that? This level of consciousness we're talking about.
Yeah, sometimes I see
So,
there'll be a fly inside, and my mom just immediately reaches for the fly spray. There's a fly. Get the
right,
fly spray. I'm like, well, why don't you give this thing a chance to get out? Like, open the door and speak to the fly and say, I invite you to leave. There is a warning for violating my property rights here. You have time. Take the opportunity.
right. My
Give it a
attitude is
chance.
they only live for a day anyway. So I mean, how long can you possibly annoy you?
Right.
It's like, let the guy live, for crying out loud. He's only got another 6, 7 hours probably. Let him land on some stuff and lay some eggs.
So
Yeah, yeah.
after peace, I don't know if you want to mention. Do you want to mention anything on peace before we go on?
Nope. I think that's good.
So here we've only got these like vague levels of enlightenment, but I do have some more material that I pulled up if you want to go through them
No, I
more.
don't. I
Okay, so
don't.
okay, let's just say that beyond 700 is all the stuff that you hear in Lao Tzu and Jesus and Krishna and Saint Germain and etc. Right? And but you can give us a general overview of that range if you like.
Well, just the general overview is it's a really, you step into that one objective reality is what enlightenment is, where you actually
Mm-hmm.
see the one, experiencing the one reality. That's your perception. And it's foreign to, the 99.999% for sure.
Hmm.
But suffice it to say, it appeals to everybody to when you hear things said by these spiritual masters and avatars. That sounds
Mm-hmm.
nice. If I could be more like Jesus, or if I could be more like Buddha, be more like Krishna, etc. Right? There's a broad appeal for that, but it seems so far out of reach, especially when you're down at desire and anger and shame and pride and so forth. Right?
Well, not
How could
just
I
out of
ever
reach. When
get
you're
there?
down there, you actually kind of like hate those people
Yeah, I wouldn't
or
know, but I
believe
wouldn't
that
say
they're
that.
fake or not real or something.
It's like I said, it seems impossible or implausible, right, at that
Mm-hmm.
level for sure. Anyway, it's a cool scale. Makes a lot of sense when you get into it. read about it a little bit more. It's fun to kind of see where you think you're at on it. And obviously you can set some goals. Like, oh, this is what's going to take for me to get to this next level. And perhaps the ultimate underlying motivation of it all is you feel better and better and better the higher you climb the scale.
Right.
After all, that is the human condition, right? We're all always trying to feel better, aren't we? That's what life's all about.
Well, just a tip here. Something I've done a few times is you can go and ask ChatGPT 4. Don't waste your time with 3.5 with this kind of question. But you can tell it specific problems that you're having repeatedly in life. You know, I'm frequently encountering this specific situation, and I do this, and the other person does that, and the world is like this, and I feel this way, and just describe it in as much detail as you want, and then say, so what levels in the David Hawkins map of consciousness scale does my experience indicate?
Interesting.
And you can start off with that, and it'll tell you. It'll go. It'll be like, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, you're this, and it'll connect it to your experience and explain all the things and how it is related. And then you say, well, what have I got to do to, approach this situation differently, and in a way that corresponds to these higher levels of consciousness? And it'll tell you, and it'll be correct. It's that good.
All right, we'll take your word for it. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Just
What's
something on
next?
Take Your Power Back, by the way. Like as we said, the Take Your Power Back introductory video. It as we said, it meets people at kind of anger and pride, right? And then it kind of ascends, like it takes you into a zone that's up at like kind of like joy and peace, and just like takes people into that, right? It doesn't mean it transforms you and you immediately become that, but it like touches on that. So while you're watching it, you ascend, you ascend through those levels, and by the end of it, you're actually feeling like a sense of joy and peace. And I would say the course, the exercises that Brad developed are very much oriented at this love, joy, peace level. Would you agree with that, Brad?
Well, sure. Yeah. It all comes down to, the person doing the work, though, right? We certainly can't make any promises that you're going to get to level X if you do the course, right? It's very much about integrating what the guidance and tips and practices in the course into your life. Not so much as, quote unquote, spiritual practices, but more like integrating your moment to moment, day to day life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's what,
absolutely.
no reason you couldn't shoot all the way to level 700 if you were really, really good at it and above. Not by no means suggesting that's going to happen, but everyone will end up where they end up based on, the amount of effort they put into it, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing is that you're gonna, that feeling, that sense of okayness, that sense of everything's all right, and that sense of I'm in control is the key, right? Is that Klaus Schwab doesn't say how my life goes, right? I say how my life goes. That's the way things should be.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal.
Okay.
What's next?
How are we for time?
We got a few minutes.
Should we
10.
mention this conscience thing?
If you want to.
I'll tell you what,
about
I'll just
10.
read it off, right?
Okay.
So we discussed with ChatGPT, we brought in our own ideas, and we just want to read you just two ideas here for conscience and consciousness, right? So conscience seems to be pointing towards something to do with your morality. We say that people lack conscience, they can't identify their behaviors as immoral or wrong, and they therefore behave immorally. So here's something from ChatGPT. The word conscience originated from the Latin term conscientia. I don't know how to pronounce it. Conscientia, maybe, which is a combination of two words, con meaning with or together, and sire meaning to know. Therefore, conscientia can be understood as knowing together or shared knowledge. Over time, conscientia evolved into the Middle English word conscience, referring to an individual's moral awareness or sense of right and wrong. It's as if when, this is from us, it's as if when people lack conscience, they're disconnected from this shared collective knowledge of right and wrong. Okay, consciousness. This is from ChatGPT. The term consciousness also has Latin roots. It is derived from the Latin word conscius, which is a combination of con, meaning with or together, and also sire, meaning to know. Conscious conveys the idea of knowing together or being aware together. In English, conscious transformed into the word conscious, basically pronounced the same, describing the state of being awake, aware, and perceptive. Consciousness then emerged as the noun form, referring to the general state of awareness and subjective experience. But if you recall from the first one, first podcast that we did on this, we kind of disagree with that conclusion that it's made. But yeah, we just wanted to bring that up as just to bring some light to these, particularly this conscience concept as well.
Right. Right. I'm not sure what we said there about Jung's collective unconsciousness. We didn't talk about that too much, but I guess it's the shared knowing.
The shared knowing. Yeah, this idea of the shared knowing that there's like this like knowledge out there that you can like tap into, right? And if you're disconnected from that collective unconsciousness, or as we might call it collective consciousness, then you're kind of lack conscience. That's just how these kind of concepts are referring to that.
Right. I think you could, won't go into any detail, but you could tie that into this armor around the heart idea, right? The bigger, the deeper and thicker the armor is, the more you're disconnected from that.
Right.
Collective conscious and conscience and unconsciousness, if you want to call it that. Oh yeah, body consciousness. We didn't even get, this is kind of really going out there. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about like muscle memory. It's an interesting idea, right? That you practice something, a musical instrument or a sport or whatever, and you get really good at it, then you don't even think about, right, the fact that you're an expert at something, right? Hitting a drive or a serve or playing, a difficult piece on a violin or a piano or whatever. You don't even think about how you're able to pull it off. It just seems to happen magically, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's as if there's something greater than operating through you.
Something doing it for you to be grateful for.
That too. Indeed. All right. Anything else there before I do my closing remarks here?
Nope. Let's have it. People waited for this, remember? You said you teased it in the last episode. So
did I?
Let's have it.
Did I?
Yeah.
I think the big idea that I just wanted to get across was that, and I see this everywhere. And I guess I'll just use the word establishment to mean that the dominant forces out there in the world and the people with the highest paying positions and getting the highest respect and showing up on TV, they're all in this position, of the establishment position. And to get there, unfortunately, there seems to be this certain level of intellectual dishonesty that they have to be willing to participate in to hold their position. Not all positions, but I'll just say a lot. Certainly when it comes to this topic of consciousness. I've mentioned it a few times throughout the podcast here, just that, to just ignore all the sages and yogis and masters of the last 5,000 years and all the texts and all the talk and in the modern day, there's frankly, it's all over the place. All of these things that defy the bag of chemicals and material and matter and bouncing particles explanation for how things got the way they are is very, very difficult for me to even consider their positions. Honestly, I find myself almost within minutes of listening to them, shutting them off, because it's as you said earlier, right? They're getting bonus points for taking us further away from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's really what's happening. So I just wanted to kind of close with that. Not that they're not highly intelligent, not that some of the work they're doing isn't interesting, but if they're just going to leave out the biggest part of what they're trying to explain, I just, there's no point in giving it any airtime as far as I'm concerned. So I don't know if you had any, if you want to tag on to any of that or want me to keep going here.
No, that's what I would say too.
Now, I did want to say, in fairness, there are several mainstream researchers in this consciousness space that do look at and do talk about, and you can every now and then you'll find them get up on a stage and discuss matters with people coming from the spiritual side. Donald Hoffman was the one I mentioned, who's kind of a cutting edge researcher in this area, and he's perfectly willing to talk to people that are bringing the spiritual perspective. So they are out there, but they can't continue to get their grants and their funding and hold their positions in the universities and talk about what we've basically talked about here in these two podcasts, which is the spiritual influence on this idea called consciousness. So I was just going to close with this last idea that, what's interesting is we started this off by talking about the emergism, right? And the epiphenomenalism, and this idea that somehow or another, this thing, called consciousness emerges into matter somehow. And that really is the leading establishment materialist idea when it comes to this word consciousness. And it just seems so simple to me if we just flipped it around and, and said, what if consciousness emerged from the spiritual realms? Right. And so matter emerged as a result of consciousness by, right, taking that one step further. So it's the exact opposite of what they're trying to figure out with the chemical idea. It just seems so simple to me, but I'll leave it at that. Anything else you want to add?
So just to, it's so they take the material for granted, and they're like, consciousness emerged from the material, and something called spiritual is just a silly idea, essentially. So the flip question is, what if we took spirit for granted and consciousness emerged from that and created or is matter? Right. Interesting question.
It's just it's just a complete inversion of what they're trying to figure out or discover. The establishment materialists. It's like if you're starting with the wrong question and the wrong idea about it, you're never going to get to an answer. Right. As far as all the evidence I can see, and I pride myself on understanding both sides of the argument up to a point, of course, is that what they're trying to do doesn't make any sense, and they're never going to get to a satisfactory answer.
Okay.
That's my position.
One last thing about take your power back.
Go for it.
Well, actually, I think it's more what you said. You were essentially said in the last one that take your power back is essentially about increasing consciousness. So why don't you just mention that idea and how it relates to the course a bit?
Increasing it. Well, it's just
however you want to put it.
You're just the course, the idea, the essence behind the idea is just kind of letting go of all the worries, troubles, complaints, issues, problems, and just trying to relax. And that's a huge part of it. It's a huge part of the course, but it is about letting go of things that aren't serving you. And that doesn't mean changing your job, changing your relationships, changing your, where you live, right? Those things don't work. You're just going to take your level of consciousness with you wherever you go, into the new relationship, new job, new city, whatever, right? So a lot of people try to do that to fix things, but this is more of an inside job is what Take Your Power Back is all about. And the reason most people don't feel good is because they feel powerless in one or more areas of their life, right? Whatever it may be. They're stuck in a dead-end job. They're frustrated with their relationship. They can't make any more money. They want to live in this beautiful place, right? They don't feel they have the power. Something's stopping them. And this is the essence of the course, is to get them to recognize that actually they have all the power, but they're giving it away. They're using their power and giving it away to, shall we say, false idols. And because they're believing things that aren't true, maybe they're below the 200 mark there, right? If you can't distinguish truth from falsehood, then you're going to continue to give away your power, because the people who are ostensibly in power today are trying to hold people below that 200 level on the consciousness scale so that they can continue to trick you into thinking they have the power. So I don't know. That'd be my quick hitter summary. Anything you'd like to add?
Just the highest recommendation for people to go and watch the video. If you're watching on the mindblowenzone.com, it's probably right below this video. So
Yeah,
scroll
yeah.
down and click play. It's gonna blow your mind.
Awesome. Yeah, we'd love to have more people come on board and join us in this highly empowered state of relaxation, joy, bliss, and peace. Yeah.
Mhm. And we also recommend we when this video will be out, we'll have like a subscribe function on the website, so you can just subscribe, get email notifications. That way, we don't have to rely on social media. And, we can just notify every week that there's a new podcast out.
Yeah. Or hit subscribe and like and notifications if you are on a social media platform.
Sure.
Perfect.
All right.
All right. I think that's a wrap. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Matt. And we'll catch everybody on the next podcast.
Okay. Thanks, Brad. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.